In this conversation, I chat with Sam Flintham-Ward, a fractional marketing director with diverse careers spanning a number of sectors, including hospitality, events, and marketing for brands such as Sipsmith Gin and the plant-based food company This. Sam shares insights from his journey, emphasising the importance of adaptability, stakeholder management, and the evolving landscape of marketing in the food and beverage sector. He reflects on his varied experience, the challenges of working in startups, and the significance of building strong team dynamics to help a brand grow. He finishes by sharing his advice to his younger self, which is all about having the confidence to pivot quicker. I hope you enjoy. So today we meet Sam Flintham-Ward, who is a fractional marketing director, who is going to share his experience with us working for some incredible brands. And I'm going to embarrass him now. And I've already mentioned this to him earlier and say his kind of career, when I've looked and researched it, embodies actually what we're about with this podcast of working with businesses, sometimes that are inventing sectors, never mind being challenges within. So we're going to pick his brain. We're going to get to try and find some traits. So Sam, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve. And what a lovely intro. I mean, I feel like my career has been kind of like chaos, but as long as it looks good from the outside, then we're winning so far, aren't we?
I'll make you feel better. I recorded a podcast 2 days ago with a chap who worked for a travel company called Explore Worldwide. Fabulous guy. The piece of advice he gave to himself, which I'm obviously going to ask you at the end of the podcast, the piece of advice that he gave to himself as a young person, now with reflection, was to do more floundering at first. And by that, he meant flip-flop, go all over the place, try something, fail, go back, and then you will find, he said, then I discovered that I love travel. And he said, for the last 30 years, I've then been working for travel businesses, and it's never felt like work. So whether you want to call it misjudged, I think you could call it floundering is now the official term that we're going to hashtag on everything.
Great.
I'm not just saying that to make you feel better. It is, I think, again, it's a lot of what we should be thinking about is that you've got to try things. And I'm sure we're going to come back when we talk about the different brands that you've worked with, that there were sort of no rules in those markets. So you had to try things, and some things went woo and flew, and other things went, oh dear, let's forget about that. Let's close that particular door. So look, it's always nice if you wouldn't mind just sort of giving us a bit of a background, giving us sort of some highlights of the careers. Like I said, not too much detail because we're gonna revisit those brands as we chat through. But I think it's good for people to understand who you are and how you've got to this lovely Tuesday afternoon talking to me.
Great. So, where do we start, Steve?
He was born.
Born in Hammersmith back in the day in the 80s. I'll start as sort of being a geeky teenager and being a bit of a sort of quieter guy in class, but then heading up to uni in Manchester and finding a city that was like full of life and fun and loads of like great parties and lots going on, and then actually graduating into a recession and coming off that high and thinking that I was king of the world and I was going to have this amazing creative job, and suddenly there were no jobs, so I had to come home to mum's house yet again with my tail between my legs and work out how we were
I
going to
thought
escape.
I thought we all did that.
No, I thought I was gonna stay in Manchester. Didn't manage it. And spent the first couple of years of my career in hospitality and events, venues, parties. It was amazing. It was really fun, but I didn't really have any weekends, and that was the main downside of that side of the industry. And so I wanted to wiggle my way out quite deliberately into brand events because I'd done a couple of events and contracts for alcohol brands. My first step was to work on the Olympics with Samsung and do a whole 6 month contract with them, which was really, really interesting to see everything from the other point of view, like not holding the tray of champagne, but running it from the brand side.
Yeah.
And then after a short time in Naughty Tobacco with a lovely company car and a great pension, I saw the
They
light.
have to buy your soul somehow, don't they?
But it was fun, and I met great people, and I learnt a lot. But I really wanted to do a hands-on marketing job because that wasn't really marketing either. I was still craving that idea of a startup and marketing and probably like working with founders. And I applied and successfully got a job for a little drink startup, not really known at the time. I think I was employee number 9 or something like that, called Sipsmith in a tiny little garage in Hammersmith in London, and I joined as the events manager, and then left 5 and a bit years later as head of UK marketing. So really did that journey with the founders and the team. Half of that time being an independent brand, So really hands-on, very little money. Like let's get through this season. Loads of pressure, but really fun at the same time. And then
Hmm.
the other half of it after an acquisition. So lots of change in terms of culture, budget, expectation, and all that kind of world. So
Brilliant. We'll come back to that because
we
I
come back
think
to that
that
one.
I think it's some really interesting stuff in there because of
Yeah,
what the brand went through in that 5 year period.
it was.
Anyway, sorry, carry on.
It
So yeah.
was. We'll come back to that one. And then what followed is, yeah, a little bit of that sort of chaos into COVID and playing around in some different categories. I went to go work for a luxury tableware brand, which was very interesting, but I think was probably a little bit too slow for me. I think I was craving a bit of that FMCG pace. So there you go, Steve. Maybe that was one of my mistakes and learnings.
There
There
you
you
go.
are.
All right, I'm writing these down for you.
Write that
Every
down.
advice at the end.
And then I did a bunch of contracts, mostly within food and drink during COVID. Obviously, it was all working from home. So I did a little stint for a wine e-commerce brand that a friend was launching and a couple of other drinks. And then I plunged into plant-based meat and worked for this for just under a year, which was a really amazing and insightful experience. Again, working in a category that's sort of no one really understands. Even the buyers almost don't understand, like, what is this? What's happening?
Where do we put you? What shelf are you on?
And how do we talk about you? And what, are you vegan or are you plant-based? And we had that debate many, 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 many times. And then, yeah, since my time at this, I've spent a bit of time back in drinks, a couple of non-alc brands, Lucky Saint, and then Clenio. And then around about this time last year, I just had a bit of a pivot, and I am now not working full time for one brand, and I actually split my week or month across a handful of brands.
Hmm.
Across, yeah, one of them I'm a part-time maternity cover. Some people I speak to a couple of times a month. Some people I have a day a week, and then that sort of fills up my month quite nicely. And actually, I think having done the loop, and having worked across a number of brands, it's a great way that I feed my brain because I'm asked all sorts of different questions throughout the week. So there's absolutely no monotony and nothing really is ever expected. So it's going well so far and it's good fun so far.
Amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you. So that's that. As I said, there's so much in there we need to unpick. We haven't got all evening, unfortunately, because like we said, bedtime stories soon and all that. But let's look at let's start with Sipsmith because as a brand, whilst you were there, went through a lot, didn't they? Because they were sort of started that London gin revolution somewhat. It was one of the first brands to really understand that you know it's not Gordon's. You know, you basically your gin says something about you as well, not just your tonic. As Fever Tree tried to say that most of it was them, not you. And also they were they were pretty early on in the pioneers of the no alcohol and low alcohol, weren't they? In terms of a product that looked and was desirable, and if you were to pour it at a dinner party or in a bar, not out of place at all. So suddenly it became an occasion drink, even though there wasn't the alcohol there. So what did you see within that as that business was trying to find its place in the market and growing through those 5 years?
Yeah, well, see, I think my first comment was that it was an amazing experience, and we probably drunk too many Negronis in that time. But there were some real assets of the brand. You mentioned like being a pioneer and being the first, and being able to credibly own a story about changing a law and having a product that was all about quality and tradition, and then the fact that it was all being done in London. So every time we started a distillery tour or an event or anything, everything we said was real and true, and it was sort of very emotive.
Yeah.
Interestingly, at the same time, we were essentially doubling the price point. You know, we were double the price of Gordon's, the market leader at the time. And so that with that comes all the challenge of building out this brand in a scrappy startup, but wanting to make sure that it feels premium, sort of almost like super premium. Uh,
Hmm.
and so there was forever that tension around basically, yeah, where do we put the budget? What are we doing? And yeah, what are we going to make the best of it? I think one of the greatest assets that we had beyond all of that was then actually having a distillery. So being able to invite consumers and trade and customers and media into our world when many brands are just based in an office. Fairly obviously, people were desperate to have a meeting at the distillery, especially on a
Yeah.
Friday. Things got really fun. So good conversations were had, and that sort of being the idea of being the first gave you a certain amount of like momentum and power to have conversations, kick off partnerships, and yeah, I look back on it with really fond memories. But we were out there at events pretty much every weekend, and the team were there doing tastings almost every night of the week. It was at times chaos, and there were amazing moments. There was one day when we actually just ran out of gin. I think when you're a startup and you're not doing your forecast and all that sort of stuff, and then the cases just go out to all these different customers and events, and we just had nothing left, and we didn't have anything. So it was sort of managed chaos, but I think the family feel in the culture was quite unique.
And the
I still
founders
speak
were
to
very sorry. The founders were very much in the business at that stage.
Yeah. They're like almost like first at their desk every day, and as a classic sort of founder tale, there was obviously tensions around who leads what, whose opinion is final, what isn't. But yeah, I mean they were great to work for, and I think yeah, everyone who's left is still chasing that culture, that family culture, where everyone feels like the business is theirs.
That sort
And
of energy that you belong. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And then
so,
how do you navigate through there? Because obviously you were brought in with although you grew your experience too, but you were brought in with a specialism and an area to look after. Were they respectful of that? Did they understand what they knew and what other people knew?
I think in that case they did, because in the world of events and drinks events and marketing events, I was bringing in, I guess, a decent amount of experience, and ideas as well. And so it wasn't just as simple as just making gin and tonics. It was then all about creative experiences and pop-up shops and sort of serving all channels with that sort of like in real life events marketing. Um,
Hmm.
and I think there were three founders, and one of them was particularly looking after sort of export, sorry. Another was then looking after commercial and marketing, and then the other was really the master distiller and was flying around the world as the brand ambassador. So yeah, they were reasonably well behaved. I mean, there were certain things that maybe they would be super passionate about, and so there was a good journey of me learning, yeah, how to deal with, what would you say, stakeholders,
Yeah,
senior stakeholders. When you come in reasonably junior, there are sudden moments where like, wow, that really matters to them, and I didn't see that one coming.
yeah.
Uh, but that's just something that I think you have to learn in time, and you have to have a couple of maybe tricky meetings where your ideas aren't really the right ones for that moment, and you sort of
Well,
have to move on to.
yeah. I think there's a fascinating point there, isn't it? Because like for most of our careers, hopefully we'll get to the heady heights eventually, but we've got to manage stakeholders above and below, haven't we? And external, and it's a skill to understand how you adapt your style for who you're dealing with, and because if you don't bring them along, you're just going to end up hitting a brick wall all the time, aren't you?
Yeah, you've got to bring them along for the journey. If anything, marketing wise, it's getting harder because 10 years on from those early Sipsmith days, now like maybe in another business, shareholders and founders are looking at every single channel all the time, and they've got their
Hmm.
eyes on Instagram, TikTok, email, website. Everything is really live and in the moment, and you can give feedback very quickly and easily. The good news is that then you can also generally, unless there's some sort of social disaster, you can generally change things quite easily as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Did
but
the
yeah,
did the did the founders have a very clear vision that was articulated to everybody, or was it just, hey, we've made a great product, let's see where this thing can go?
I suspect behind the scenes there was an amazing vision that was really well thought through, but articulated around the office and around the distillery. I think was like, we're going to be the best gin in the world, and it was sort of
Yeah,
quite simple and mighty. I can't really remember what it was right at the beginning,
yeah,
but it was all about best because it was about quality and the right
yeah,
messaging and changing a category.
yeah.
I think it then develops, doesn't it? Maybe from year two, year three, when a couple of more senior people join the team, then things get a little bit more sort of rule book in terms of what the vision is and what we're trying to do and how we're going to get there.
And sometimes you lose a little bit of that energy and that collaboration that maybe was there, that everybody was getting behind, just this energy to succeed.
Yeah, and I think having spoken to a number of people that have had it, like after an acquisition, there's inevitably the founders and the team are really trying to hold on to that culture and that vibe and that way of life. And
Hmm.
that just does change. Of course, it changes because it
Yeah,
does no longer feels like a little family business and everyone's just working in a shed and making do. Suddenly, these businesses join like the biggest businesses of their category in the world. With that comes process change, compliance, and things just get a little bit more serious. And the positive is you might suddenly have more budget. You might have access to different
yeah,
partners or agencies, and you can actually then start doing real kind of big boy marketing. but then also if you've never done that before, that feels really scary.
Yeah.
You're like, I
Well,
don't know how.
well, suddenly the downside is a bit of a bigger drop, isn't it? Where if it doesn't
Yeah.
work,
And then inevitably, I think you get a bit of a shift in team, and some people move on because it's not for them, and some people are suddenly thrive because they came from big business and that's what they know.
yeah, and
Um,
they bring their skills into the team
yeah,
that way, don't they?
yeah.
Because
And I stayed
it's an,
2 years or something.
yeah, I suppose it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because although unfortunately Gordon's is, I think it's still the number one gin, isn't it? And sad enough to stay just because of volume and distribution, and there's lots of people who don't really understand what they're drinking. But there was like this second tier that were where Sipsmiths were playing, and then lots of people came in. We did some work for Whitley Neal, who was one of the Halewood portfolio, and again, they very much concentrate on the botanicals that came from Africa, from its heritage, and there from all of that side. And there seemed to be like a two-horse race in a good way, where people who knew what they were doing, you were fighting in that area, because we couldn't, and you couldn't outspend Gordon's for what they were doing, but you suddenly became the grown-up in the second tier. And I don't mean that in a rude way, but it was like a two-horse race, wasn't it?
Yeah, in
Um,
some ways. And then the tiers almost like segmented and fragmented again when you then had like pinks and flavors.
yeah, yeah,
We were one of the gin houses that didn't really want to do a pink gin. We didn't want to be sort of fad led. We were all about that classic tradition vibe. And
yeah.
then, yeah, lots of other distilleries, were successfully making pink gins, fruit gins, and really diversified. And some of them just had huge, like really large portfolios. But that definitely wasn't the strategy at Sipsmith. And at that point, that probably was like when things were getting a bit more serious and grown up, and it was working out where we should sacrifice and what we should go after and what we shouldn't.
But that's vital, isn't it? Because a lot of those brands, I saw it happen with the other the same. They brought out some very, very strange flavors, and you're thinking you've come away from what you told everybody you were about. Because once you
Yeah.
put flavors of that strength in, you couldn't taste really any botanicals, if you're honest, or any of the raw
No, and
material.
surely you've diluted what the brand is and stands for in
Mm.
favor of listings, sales, and just it all just gets a bit cash cow in some of those scenarios. But if you see it from a brand point of view, it probably was a land grab, really.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
was how quickly can we get a large range of products out that we can get on shelf and get into pubs and get on the flog. And God, it was just growing so quickly. There's now over 800 craft distilleries across the country, whereas 10 years
yeah.
ago there weren't barely any. So yeah, with that comes lots of creativity and fun and like a nice community of brands. But yeah, maybe you're right. There were a couple of different segments. I guess we always saw ourselves as a little bit of a David and Goliath versus Big
Yeah,
Gin,
yeah.
and
Which people love to buy into, don't they? As well, they like the challenger aspect of what these new brands are about.
yeah, but it was real. It wasn't smoke and mirrors. You could go to the distillery on a
Yeah,
midweek tour at 6:30 and spend an hour and a half with a bunch of gin nutters, and then leave a bit wobbly with a tiny bottle of gin and go down to the pub. And that's why I think I just loved it, because it was all real and it was all there, and there was no like secret factory behind the scenes. It was super transparent. It was literally
yeah.
like we threw open the doors and people came into our house. And gosh, I mean, I don't know how many tours I counted up that I had done by the time I left, but it was probably something like 500 or something.
Yeah.
Tours and welcome guests through the door, but it was
But
great.
it's become part of it, hasn't it? There's Slingsby Gin in Harrogate that Marcus Black runs, and again, same sort of thing. It's quite amusing if you ever see they have a small distillery on a hill in Harrogate, just down from Betty's, all very Harrogate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but the danger is you go in, you have your tasting, you make your cocktails, etc. And when you come out, you're straight downhill. So there's some brilliant sights of people going out and then wobbling down the street. But that's what it's about, isn't it? It's become an event, and it's wonderful. So do you remember the decision making in terms of bringing out the no alcohol angle?
We talked about it. So that actually, I can't claim that project at all. That came out after I left, but
Right.
we
Okay.
we,
Fine.
we were yeah we were umming and ahhing for a long time, and I say there was a decent amount of internal debate as to whether a non-alcoholic gin really was a true classic gin expression, which
Yeah.
is what obviously was one of our like values around
Yeah.
product and quality and heritage and things like that. But obviously the gang that I left behind then went on to launch Free Glider, which was one of the
Yeah.
first shelves, and
Yeah.
super tasty, and you can see all the product values. It really tasted like a gin,
Yeah.
and that was what was always going to be important for Sipsmith as a
In
brand.
that scary way where you're thinking, are you pulling my leg here? Because that's that because you got the smell and you got the whole ambience of it, you felt that there was alcohol in it, even though there wasn't. And it was a because at the time the level of non-alcoholic beers was terrible, wasn't it? You tasted it, you could always get that taste, that aftertaste in it. Whereas
It
you
was.
had this product and it was like, this is a really nice drink.
I also think it was. If you think about what else was around then, it was really seedlip era, and
Yeah.
seedlip obviously lots of base around nature and peas and very delicate. Whereas that wasn't really what Sipsmith was going after at all in terms of taste profile. So seedlip was like totally new over here in one direction, and then yeah,
Yeah.
Sipsmith was all about like the classic traditional flavor profile of a London dry gin. Um,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Brilliant. Colin, let's switch tack now and talk about, because we obviously did some work together with you on this,
Mm.
on the plant-based, meat-free, but it's meat. Now there you had everything. You had the start of this, which was an ultimate challenger in the sector, but in a sector that nobody, like you said, nobody really knew what it was. If I know that sounds ridiculous, because retailers weren't sure, what shelf space do we put this under? Is it vegetarian? Is it vegan? Or is actually, because obviously a lot of the products that this do are meat replacement made of plant, aren't they? If I've got that right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was really clear when I joined, and even interviewing with founders Andy and Pete, that it was almost like this plant-based brand or a meat-free brand for meat lovers.
Yeah,
And one of their pillars was around this like hyper-realistic. So the one of the first products that so they made a chicken that was really fibrous, just like chicken, and then we got really famous for a bacon that was really bacony and
yeah,
smoky, tastes like it just been sizzling in a pan. And yeah, it was really cool. I mean, even I was living with some people at the time, and they would maybe try a bit of chicken in a stir fry and see if anyone actually noticed, because it was really incredibly real.
yeah,
And that with that vision of the product came the vision for the marketing, which was, testing reality and maybe being a little bit more cheeky and naughty versus what the rest of plant-based or the vegan category were doing at the time. It was a world of a lot of people skipping around fields, very green and organic and good for you. Whereas this, the packaging, like big, like black
yeah,
and white logo, really standing out on shelf or in the freezer, like wherever you would see it, and then just being much more brash and daring with the marketing. So generally stunts that were testing whether people could tell if it was meat or not. And before I joined, they'd done a really successful stunt. I think it was in Shoreditch with an Ed Sheeran lookalike. Who was making nuggets? Obviously, they weren't nuggets. Obviously, he wasn't Ed Sheeran, and they fooled thousands of people and then shot it basically Vox Pop style before Vox Pops were really cool. And that performed really well, and lots of people that had discovered the brand could remember that, because it just really brought to life for them what the brand stood for, what the product stood for, what it meant to them. They maybe didn't identify as that sort of really green for the earth, plant-based person. So yeah, it really was sort of challenging the expectations that people would have around a category, but doing it from a brand point of view. Um,
it was actually, because it was very interesting how the hierarchy of messaging that they had. Because, like you say, a lot of people in that sector started with "we're saving the world,"
yeah,
from that point of view, which I think puts off a big chunk of the market even trying it, because it's just like, that's not for me. Whereas for everything that I could see, what they were trying to do was try it. It's all about trial. You
yeah,
will be surprised. Like
yeah.
a lot of their lines were, better than bacon sort of angle, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The challenge with that role at the time was that it was COVID season, so we
Yeah,
really wanted to be. If it had been a different time, we would have had an amazing roadshow of trial, probably in a really stunty, amusing, aggressive way. But
yeah,
that was all taken away from us because everyone was pretty much locked at home. And while there was sort of a bit of experimentation with cuisine, it wasn't the same boost in sales that you saw in like wine and spirits of people
yeah,
boozing at home during
yeah.
lockdown. Um, but we it was great doing something different, yeah, to your point, and standing out in a category. I mean, the stunt that we did for April Fool's Day of that year
I
was
didn't know there was allowed to talk about this.
I don't know, can we talk about
Yeah,
it?
of course we can.
There
I
weren't
think it's
any names.
brilliant.
Obviously I can't claim all these ideas, but we were working with a bunch of really creative people at the time who came up with this idea that we could fool our audience into thinking that this chicken was so realistic only because it was made using DNA extracted from chickens. And so we shot essentially like a whistleblower pretend chicken factory, and a whistleblower that was in a lab, and she'd sort of taken some imagery from her phone, and then yeah, she was revealing it through the company's social media.
Yeah, it's like done like as if it was a secret documentary, wasn't it? Yeah.
And it was so realistic that one of the buyers saw it and almost delisted us immediately, so we had to take it down. We'd explained that it was April Fool's, and she said, "Well, consumers won't know that. I didn't know that. This is really realistic." So maybe that's a story for like a really good learning, that if you're trying to do a stunt, you also need a way out, and or you need to be able to have obviously we had a reveal scheduled. I think we had to pull it all forward and then take it down. But I mean, for a tiny budget, just to make a video with one actor and some great editing, I think we got 2 million views or something like that before midday on April the 1st. And yeah, I mean, that was a memorable. I remember the head of sales being like, "This is a nightmare. This retailer is incredibly angry angry with you."
Maybe because they didn't get the joke. It was more that, yeah, I've done my job, yeah. But that's it, isn't it? That's a classic where you've got to just think differently, because I suppose the market leader was Quorn, wasn't it? When really, and interestingly, whether people saw it as a competitor, if that makes sense, because Quorn had done, although similar, they weren't quite as making meat type products. They were making products to replace meat. I know this is the problem, isn't it, with the sector? It was they're nuanced, so nuanced.
And there was so much to learn, and we didn't necessarily have the time or budget to do. There wasn't necessarily appetite to do focus groups and sit down with consumers, because again, it was a bit like land grab. Like, we need to get so much of this product out before someone else does. Yeah, it was almost like, if we almost had a rule. I can't remember if we ever wrote it down. If it was something that Quorn would say or do, we just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it was almost like that creative lens. Like, if that could be attached to Quorn, then no. Whether it's product or marketing or whatever, then don't. But also don't forget price point, because we were building out a slightly higher price point and segment than Quorn would have been, as that sort of legacy brand that had been around for a long time.
And a lot of their stuff was frozen as well, which tends to be a different profile, doesn't it? In a way, again, we just came back to where is this stuff put in the shelves and which coolers, and where's it allowed to go away from meat, etc., and all this sort of thing.
And I think the best thing for the category was not being in the freezer, to be honest. We really almost wanted to be next to bacon, if that would have ever been allowed. I don't think they would ever do it. But when I go shopping, I still see the brand there. It's in the chiller. It's in that bit at the front of the store where maybe you would pick up something new. I don't know the stats, but I don't think really people browse frozen in quite the same way as they do that first section. I don't know.
No, we did a podcast with a lady called Lucy Barber, who I think it's coming out in a week or so, and she's basically a creative, strategic creative thinking. She goes into brands and helps them as a team think creatively. It's fascinating what she does. But one of the things she spoke about, and she's worked for lots of different brands, similar to yourself, she's been in a list of things, and she talked about the market leader or the established brand within a market nearly being driven by fear of everyone catching them up, whereas the challengers were driven by bravery. And I think if anybody has, after this, please Google some of this, because wasn't there a chicken breast implant thing that this did on one of the spoofs? Anyway, we'll move on from that. We can edit that out later. No, but on a serious note, that bravery is as long as you can react, and I think what was interesting with this, it is a good product. Now, whether you are meat free or not, forget that. But in terms of the quality of the product, it was excellent, and it was up there, and it justified its higher price points.
Yeah.
So there is a bit like, just get people to know about it so that they'll put their little toe in the water to find out if it's for them, which is very different to saying which brand you're choosing, because you're asking someone to come up with a concept of, try this thing that looks like bacon and tastes like bacon but is made from plants. It's big.
Think about the timing with COVID, because it's almost like at that point when I was in the brand, we were in lockdown, and then maybe people were starting to consider their health and their body and everything. I don't know when that wave, if you could graph it, when did that really come about? Because certainly that first lockdown was about how do we get through, but then a year or two later, what came out was people moderating their drinking, people really thinking about.
They do so much in the first lockdown. It's like,
but
I've got a detox.
One of those things on the list is maybe people thinking about eating less meat or eating less types of foods and fats and all of that. And that, for for a lot of people, or as a meat eating house, that would be quite hard to do, or
Yeah.
you really want something to replace it that was really tasty.
I
Um,
think it's difficult as well, like you say, with a lot of families where the parents may have an agenda to try and eat more healthily. Getting your children to eat something that isn't what they believe is the food they want. You end up with a fractional cooking, and you're never going to have it in a family. It's just too hard.
yeah,
So you've got that angle, haven't you?
yeah. They also got other interesting places to play. So for this, like food service and restaurant partners.
Yeah.
What about there was an amazing piece of research that basically I think the headline was that if you have a vegan in your friendship group, they will make the decision on where you eat. So
Yeah.
although at the time it was sort of
Yeah.
10% of the country were sort of saying that they were vegans, they were actually quite powerful in terms of making decisions for their peers and their families and where they would eat out. So there were a certain number of restaurant groups that then responded, and I mean some of them were basically making a B-side to everything on the menu and just saying you can have everything plant-based if you want.
Yeah.
Big open arms to vegan community and saying bring your friends because you can have it plant-based, they can have it
Yeah.
chicken.
Yeah. Very
Um,
smart, really, isn't
yeah,
it?
I mean it's a
And
little bit of what we saw in 0% alcohol as well. The clever cocktail groups are I think the ones that are being able to offer lots of delicious non-alc drinks, not just one. And I'm sure there's something similar in that if you've got someone who's not drinking or drinking less, they've got to have a bit of sway in terms of where you would head out of an evening.
Yeah. And you've
Yeah,
obviously last well, 3 years with Lucky Saint, and then I'll say it correctly. Hang on, we're writing it down. Calenio.
correct. Gold
Oh,
star. Yeah,
yes. Thank you very much.
yeah,
Um, Again, they're trying to ensure that the alcohol-free element of your drinking is still as fun and tasty.
mm,
Like we talked about Sipsmith, but with that, they were started from scratch to be alcohol-free. And do
yeah.
you think some of the growth of that sector was driven post-COVID, where there was suddenly right, we're out again now, we need to get healthy, we need to sort of build ourselves back up?
I'm sure that COVID has given it an extra nudge on. I think it was probably happening anyway, but I think it's
Yeah,
spot up. And the latest numbers, I think, show that 3 out of 4 of UK adults are thinking about their alcohol intake and moderating,
yeah,
which makes it really now almost like a mass thing. And that doesn't mean that everyone is running around looking for non-alc products, because I also think that's a bit of a false statement that's out there. But people are definitely thinking about it, and they're thinking about what options there might be.
I
Um,
think I think that's it, isn't it? Again, with if you look at the quality, so we start with Sipsmiths, their product was of great quality. Those two are good. You look
mm,
at Guinness Zero now, which is, yeah, look, you can very, very slightly tell, but it's perfect relative to how you used to have beers. And I think what we're seeing a lot with the alcohol brands that we work with, or even of the brewers, let's say, is that they've worked out that people are still drinking, but maybe having a couple of low or no alcohol, then having their treat, and it becomes the event, so it becomes an even bigger drink, if that makes sense. But that's just realizing. See, if you can give someone, if they like your brand, then you can give them a no and an alcohol version. They're going to buy into it. So it's quite exciting, really.
yeah, which is interesting because that's not what Lucky Saint is. But I also think
Hmm.
that gives them a bit of purity and
Okay.
simplicity. You just know that your Lucky Saint is going to be your super tasty pint or bottle of
Yeah.
beer at the end. Whereas a brand like Heineken obviously has both, which comes with its own challenges and all sorts of like compliance and irritation and all of that. So I would rather be working at Lucky Saint probably than Heineken because of all that complexity. And yeah, the time at Clenio was similar. No, working for a purely non-alc brand really did have its benefits and advantages.
Yeah.
At the same time, for some of the platforms like TikTok, they treated us like an alcohol brand. So some of our content would be censored. It wouldn't really do very well, even though we were, talking about a moderating lifestyle, and it wasn't about glorifying alcohol,
Yeah.
things like that. So even the world of non-alc comes with its challenges, even though you'd think that it might be sort of easier to market or you're easier to get around it.
Yeah, because most supermarkets, when you buy non-alcoholic, you still get age check, don't you?
Yeah, and to some degree,
Or maybe it's just me.
yeah, Steve, you're a joker. I think what non-alc brands shouldn't be doing is as advertising or directly talking to children,
Yeah.
because particularly some of them that taste like alcohol, it's just not really appropriate. It's like that
Yeah.
vaping, but it's just not quite right.
Yeah.
Um, but also, I don't think that's what the new generation are probably looking for. If they've not boozed like us, then maybe they don't want products that taste like booze.
Yeah, because they never got the taste, have they, for it? Yeah.
No, this whole new segment of alcoholic drinks that are actually not really based on anything else. And I
Hmm.
think there is a wide range of quality in within that, Steve. Given that we've been talking a lot about quality of products, some of them are absolutely delicious, but some of them just aren't quite there yet. But again,
Yeah.
it's a new category, isn't it? Um,
Yeah. And it's
yeah.
galloping towards that perfection, isn't it, though? So that's exciting.
Mm,
Um, I wouldn't mind just pulling back from specific brands now and
mm.
just talk a little bit about, I think this is nice to give advice about what brands are doing in terms of marketing and positioning and propositions. It is about people and how they manage and how they bring in. So you've over that, we've just gone through 6 or 7 amazing brands that you've worked for in at varying lengths from 5 years to sort of 6 months has been your tenure in most of those. How do you rock up on day one and obviously not I'm saying the clock's running, but you've got to deliver something. How do you bring a team together quickly? What have you learned over the last few years in those different roles?
Particularly relevant for me at the moment, given that as a fractional
Yeah,
person, as a fractional role, you're parachuting into a team. It might be for a month, it might be for 6 months. I think one of the things that you have to do is kind of like um, win the room and connect with people pretty quickly.
yeah,
There's not really time to be messing around and warming up and all that stuff that you might do if you were starting a longer tenure or a forever job that you
yeah,
assume that you're joining forever. So you kind of just have to get going. And so I think what I do personally in that sort of situation, as I have done with all my roles, is just throw my energy at everyone in the room. And most of the time it sticks. Some people probably find me slightly energetic, but that's fine. And yeah, give it your all and ask questions and learn, and then get comfortable with giving feedback sooner rather than later. Because there's no point being in a role and then waiting 3 months before you say something. And
yeah.
I think that would be one of my big learnings from life. There's definitely times I look back and think, why didn't I just say something a week in? Why did I let
Hmm.
that grumble on over months? So yeah, it's about quick action and connecting with people, I would say, and also being willing to take feedback back from them. That how are you
Yeah.
getting? It's just not something that people really do enough, I don't think. And at the beginning of my career, I was really nervous about feedback because I thought everyone was just telling me that I was useless, and I didn't see it as development and sort of growth. But now feedback is really useful, and to learn, nuances about a culture or a team or a business or what happened before you arrived or what happened before you walked into the room. All that stuff you can get from feedback and from sort of welcoming questions about how you're getting on, or indeed just learning about the people before you turn up is another one.
Yeah. A bit of research just to say you care, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I have had a few situations where maybe there has been not like an awkward situation, but maybe where people aren't totally sure of someone arriving in a head of marketing role. And so what I've done in those situations is arrange a call and have a little or a coffee or a face to face before you start, and just take that sort of enemy mentality away, prove to people that I'm just a real human being. And yeah, I mentioned earlier, I deliberately at the moment am not calling myself a consultant because I don't arrive in a briefcase and a grey suit. Actually, I'm quite action orientated and I want to get stuff done. And fundamentally, I want to help people as well. It's not. It is about the business and the brand, but also that will also happen much easier if you've got a happy team that are learning and engaged and they like it and they enjoy it. So I would
Yeah,
say that
because
I invest a decent amount where I can in the people around me.
there's
Um,
there's a lot.
Largely.
Obviously, you're probably going in naturally by that role, where in a period of change within that organisation
Mm.
anyway. And if you can try and suggest some stability, because whatever people say, most people hate change. It scares them because it's like,
Unless Steve, your suggestion is to tell people to stop doing 5 things.
yeah,
That can be quite impactful. If you can walk in and spend a week with someone or spend a couple of days with a business and say, do you know what? I think these 5 things I would put a big question mark over immediately. Because there are in businesses that have been rolling 1 to 5 years, you sometimes fall into habits. There's a really good example of meetings that have been happening for years, and you're like,
it's like why?
why is the whole company stopping for an hour to have that
Yeah,
meeting? Why don't we just not have the meeting? Or why don't we just do it with a couple of people and then share out all of the results of the meeting in a quick message? And and again, I have to be careful with myself with suggestions like that because some of it comes across as quite cutthroat. Whereas I'm just like, oh, I know that because I've worked for 10 brands in the last
yeah,
10 years.
yeah,
I saw those guys, so why don't we just copy them? because they were
Yeah,
doing a really good job of it. And I think sometimes that, yeah, a bit of shameless copying and just saying, I saw this in this last business. We could do that, and it would be quite effective here.
100%. I think I've said it a few times on this now. There are no new ideas. It's about application of your experience. I mean, you and
Mm.
I, when we were planning today, you talked a little bit, and a few people said this about an imposter syndrome.
Mm.
And I think you need to sometimes go through this to actually understand that unique collection of experience that you have is valuable. And it's not being arrogant. And like you say, if you can, you'll have made mistakes. We've all made mistakes on our journeys. And if you can cut one mistake out, not, I think you still have to fail to learn properly as an individual. But I think if you can just help someone or at least point them in the right direction, just to go, I'd look over there rather than tell them how to get there. I think it's
Yeah.
an amazing skill that you've just got to have the confidence to go, come on, let's do it and do it. I think you're right. Bring them with you because then that's really exciting for everybody.
But I also think I've only really got to that point within the last year or the
Hmm.
last couple of years. It takes quite a lot of time to build up. And then you have to really believe in yourself, and then you might get knocked back again. And in all the psychometric tests that I've done, my resilience scores always come back reasonably low.
Yeah,
My ability to bounce back. But when you then know things like that, you can actually proactively work on it, and you
yeah.
can try and recognize the signs of when you might be feeling like that.
So
Um,
that idea of potentially, with those early chats of not showing your soft underbelly, but showing there's a vulnerability there too. That I
mm,
need this to work for me as much as for you guys. So how can we do this together? How can you share what you already know about the organisation? I can bring in my expertise, and together we can hopefully accelerate a change.
and also
Um,
just be a real person. And because what's happening in a lot of businesses at the moment is because everyone is running around, everyone is busy running because everything's tricky. Just stop and pause and just ask someone like how they are, how was their weekend, like know the name of their
mhm.
dog. I'm quite keen to do that and just be a real human at the same time. Again, I actually believe that if you can then make marketing teams and broader teams, you can make them happier, the work will be better, the business will do better.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
sometimes a little 10-minute soft, cozy chat on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon might feel like a waste of time. But for me, that's probably more important than that big long hour when we got everyone to look at a spreadsheet together. Um,
I think that's really good because a lot of businesses believe, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give us, free coffee, free bacon sandwiches, Bing bags and PlayStations and all this sort of thing. And what they actually miss is what people want is connection and they want to be able to speak to people. And like you say, not big formal get-togethers where you get in a room, but like just that, the water cooler moment, let's call it, but where you just spend a bit of time to actually ask them and remember they've got a dog, a cat, a kid,
yeah,
whatever, and they can and that you care.
yeah. And for me, for food and drink brands, that is then also trying to leave the office and go to the pub, go to a restaurant, go to a cafe, and almost like be a consumer for a minute. Just take
Yeah,
yourself out of a little sort of blinkered zone, and just go and have a little chat because that's sometimes where the best chats are had,
yeah.
rather
You
than
just
the
go.
formal stuff in the meeting room. So it's not, it's not always possible. I can't always practice what I preach, but I used to pre-COVID in particular. I would really enjoy doing catch-ups like off-site, like
Yeah,
coffee chats off-site. Let's just leave. Let's just walk away.
yeah.
It's not gonna cost that much, but suddenly that you might discover something about someone, or you might, that's the stuff where you work out like, is this employee happy? Are they going to leave, or are they going to do amazing work next week? Um,
Yeah.
the lift the lid moments, maybe.
No, I love it. I think it's really important. And is there any pattern within the businesses? Like, sorry, so if you're getting dropped in, is there a clear job to do, or is it has each one been different? Like, so do you know when you leave either at the end of the 1 day a week or your 6 month tenure, whichever that has been, that you can look and pat yourself on the back and go, yeah, I've delivered what that particular owner or that particular leadership team wanted me to do.
Bit of a mix, Steve, and I think that's probably quite good. Sometimes a founder has a really clear need, and they say, but within the next 2 weeks, we need to achieve X, and then
Yeah,
I'll respond and say, cool, then this is what we should do, really,
yeah.
and let's not overcomplicate it because we don't have long and da da da
So
da. So
straight into delivery and
straight
bang,
into
off we
it,
go.
cool, bang, here we go. Whereas others, it's more like, okay, well, we need you to come and be our marketing lead for 6 months. And yeah, we're just going to parachute you in, and please, can you just pick everything up? And you'll be doing everything from budgeting to one-to-ones to strategy to product, and it's very broad. And in some ways, you kind of don't know what each day is going to provide you. and
Hmm.
that's a little bit more like a real interim role in that sort of scenario. And then there's some that are a little bit in between where they have an idea of what's going on and what they need to do, but they don't necessarily know how to
Yeah.
do it, how to go about it. Or in some cases, is what's the team that we need to deliver that? Or do you have a supplier that could help me? Or do you have a template that I could use just so I can do that really quickly? Um,
And I suppose that's when they are. That's, back to giving you the confidence. That's what you're bringing. You're not just bringing yourself. You're bringing your network and your experience that can help give them a leg up the
that's
ladder.
good, 'cause it's got to be about a fast start. That's why I'm
Yeah.
here. I think that's what I was sent to do at this point, is just to speed things up and essentially to waste, or sorry, save time and money.
Not
Sorry,
waste
not
time. That's
no,
not
no, no,
good.
no, no.
Not
Let's
good.
just,
We'll
you
edit
know,
that bit. Yeah.
just to give a bit of a fast track. And I think the templates thing is a good example where someone might spend hours working out what's the best way to do a marketing calendar, or I can just whiz one over, semi-populate it, and then they can get going. It's going to
Yeah.
waste hours and hours of their time that they could be spending on anything that they need to do, from supply chain to hiring to all the other stuff that founders have to do.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I like the variety. I think that's how I get my Friday kicks now, is that I've helped a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
I suppose the fabulous thing about that you're going into different businesses with different setups and different leaders, and you're still learning, which I think that is a crucial thing in all
Mm.
of our. If we're going to work and we're not learning something new, I think you just get very stale very quickly.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a good example of that of the last few years, in the most recent businesses, and now is thinking about investment and helping founders. Like, what do we say in the deck, or what do we say in the story? And now I've done loads of decks and proposals, and I think I maybe that's something that I could do. And again, gives you a bit more confidence once you've done it a few times. Whereas 5 years ago, I would have said, no, 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 that's for the FD, the big boss. I can't do that. That's not for
Yeah,
me.
that's the
That's
grown
the
up stuff, but it's not, is
yeah.
it?
Just sometimes you just got to sort of be put in an awkward position and just jump off and give it a go. And what's the worst that can happen, really?
Because I think we've seen that we've worked with a lot of brands when they're on that journey, and they would only be in that position if the numbers was kind of right or in the right ballpark, i.e., they were making good money, they're on a good growth trajectory. And so that becomes like a common, well, you wouldn't be talking to investors if you didn't have that. So the bit that I think like yourself and we can add is like that. Okay, so what's the story? What's the story that the investor is going to buy into, that they can see how that line on the graph can continue to grow over a prolonged period, because that's why they'll invest. Because otherwise everything's historical, isn't it? It's what you've done.
Yeah, and I guess from the investing conversations that I've seen, a lot of them is that they're buying into the passion of the founder and the
Yeah,
team. And
yeah.
how daring are they going to be? How creative are they going to be? If it's a David and Goliath, yeah, how naughty are they going to be? Yeah,
It's that DNA there that they can go, that we can keep leveraging it. We can give them, because they're going to put a structure and a framework around it to allow it to grow. But it's got to have that spark, otherwise it just becomes nothing, doesn't it?
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Right, quickly then, as usual, I've run over my time.
yeah.
Couple of questions, a bit of reflection. So you called it chaos. I threw flounder in there, but we're not. They're not fair words, because I just think it's saying. Looking back, then, do you regret anything of the career that you've had, or actually now as you're coming to understand what your superpowers are and you move into this next stage, is it something that actually you go, I was a genius to go that route, or would you go back and change anything?
I used to think that maybe I'd stayed at Sipsmith too long because I never wanted to be the grumpy guy in the corner that was like, "Oh, I don't like change." Like no one wants to be the dusty old armchair that's just sort of sat there. But actually, I think I was still learning right up until like the week that I moved on.
Yeah,
I did see like peers and friends around me that were floundering a lot already. They'd moved jobs every year and they were basically doing much better than me. And I was like, how's that happened? I didn't think that's
yeah.
what you meant to do. Um, but I guess now that I've been able to exercise a bit more of that floundering stroke learning, um,
We,
not
we, are,
really.
we are creating a whole new genre of
I
type
know
of career now, aren't we? I
there's a
love
new
it.
podcast in this, and I'm going to
Get
have
it,
it.
get it trademarked quick.
Yeah. So I don't think any regrets. I think there's things that I've learned along the way. I've mentioned a few of them already. I think definitely
Yeah,
when you're interviewing, one of the things that I tell everyone is to make sure that you're not just trying to get the job, you're interviewing them as well,
yeah.
and
Okay.
make and make sure that there is a really good click there. Because I think particularly like later on down your career, you want to be somewhere for a little while, and you want it to work out, because every time you change job, in my situation, you're interrupting your family life. You've got a new routine, all
Yeah.
of that sort of stuff. So floundering, yes, but then also floundering impacts others around you. And during COVID, I mean, when I was contracting, some friends basically were like, "Well, where do you work now? We really can't keep up." And they were doctors, so they were like, "We've worked in the NHS since forever, and that's what we do." So
Yeah.
we're fascinated by what is going on with you.
Where are you? Who are you? What cap have you got on today?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
think that I don't want to miss that point you just made there about um, that when you are interviewing, when you are looking for a new role, it's as important that you don't just take the job because you think, oh, that brand's really cool. But if you get there and you get a bad feeling, trust that bad feeling, because you're going to spend, and we've talked about this before, more of your waking hours at this place of work. So you've got to make sure it's right for you, because you'll then enjoy it more rather than thinking, oh my, it stops being work, doesn't it? I think that's
And
the
it's the
key.
same theme as I mentioned around, like, if something doesn't make sense to you or is worrying you, then bring it up rather than just carrying on. But it's
Hmm.
sort of, you have to be a little bit brave, to be able to do that. And sometimes you don't feel brave when you've just started a new job.
Yeah.
So it's about
No, exactly. I think that does come with getting a few years under your belt, but
a
it's
bit of
good
flounder.
advice. Yeah, a bit of fun. But it's quite good to think earlier, because as an employer, if someone came to you with, look, I'm feeling like this because of this, it's not just like, oh, I don't like that. It's like, you want to know that, because actually it might be something, you might have a structure wrong, or you might have a problem somewhere. And I think it's really helpful as long as it's built on something, not just like, don't like it. You
Exactly.
can't do
But
much with that.
when I talk to old colleagues and they say something, the first thing I just say is, great, tell them, pick up the phone and tell them. Like, don't sit around whinging about it. Don't spend the whole weekend worrying about it. Pick up the phone and tell them, because if it doesn't work out, if they, for whatever reason, then at least you said your piece and you said it rather than
Yeah.
like sitting on something.
Yeah. You tried. Yeah.
Tried,
So is
tried.
there final thing then? Final
Yeah.
thing, Sam. Is there a piece of advice then that you would give young Sam, fresh out of Manchester Uni, that you think would help him that to make just make his career start on the right path?
Well, I don't want to be too repetitive, but
You're
I
allowed
think
to be.
it's actually
It's the
it's not
first rule
necessarily
of marketing, isn't it? Stick to your
yeah, keep
brand and
going,
keep
keep
on
going.
it. Keep on it.
Is during COVID, everyone talked about pivoting, right? But it was basically the idea of, like, just pivot a bit quicker. So I think just the way I am and the way that my brain works, sometimes I'll hold on to a plan, or I definitely used to hold on to something, whether that was an annual plan or I don't know, a project or a timeline. And sometimes I would just get so rigid trying to deliver it, trying to execute it, and trying to be best in class from that sort of like 15-year-old geek mindset. Sometimes you go so far you can't even see that what you're doing isn't making a difference, or you're not
Hmm.
even remembering to ask for feedback or look at your outputs and things like that. So it's a little bit like, I don't know, yeah, learn as you go, but basically just pivot quicker. Don't be afraid to change the plan. And I like a plan and a bit of routine, personally. So I've had to learn that in work. Sometimes the plan just changes the next day, or the plan just
Yeah.
changes next, and actually that's okay. Like, get comfortable with it. And for me, that's a bit of a learning after, as I said, after COVID, of a bit of a change of ways of working. Like, no more 12-month plans. Now, really, just plan for the next 3 months, because you have got no idea what is happening in
Yeah.
6 months. So don't waste your time too much on that. So I think that short, sharp burst, and then, yeah, pivot quicker, and just be a bit more agile.
Brilliant.
There you
I love
go.
it. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. I've loved that. I hope you have too.
It's been great. Thanks for having me, Steve.
Right. We'll watch your journey with great interest. Thank you very much, Sam.
Floundering.com. I'll see you later. Bye, Steve.